Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Guys and a Chainsaw. I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
Continuing our month of sequels, we decided to dive into a sequel that we haven't actually done the original for yet, surprisingly enough. This one is Poltergeist 2. The Other Side, which came out in 1986. And after watching this film again for the first time in ages, I think I realized I remember more about this movie than I do the original.
Yeah.
We used to watch this all the time as kids. I think we had it on tape. Yet I have forgotten so much about it. Like, I knew I had key scenes in my head, but as far as the whole plot and kind of how it all went down, that much was new to me again. For the first time. So it was fun to watch this a second time around. The original movie made a big splash. Tobe Hooper directed it. Steven Spielberg produced it. And there has always been some speculation that maybe Steven Spielberg did a little bit more than just producing it. He was on set a lot of the time. But we get a lot of conflicting stories about that. That's the original. The second one here was directed by a guy named Brian Gibson. Brian Gibson is a British director, and before this, he really didn't do a whole lot. He directed a bunch of videos for Styx and shot a movie called Breaking Glass. So this was kind of his first big-time film. And then the producers and writers of the original Poltergeist came back on to write the screenplay for this one as well. Mm-hmm. And Jerry Goldsmith came back on to do the score for this, and he actually won an award for the score, and the score is great. I have to say, it's a fantastic score. He did something a little bit different than he did for the original, but it just turned out wonderful. In fact, the minute, about 5 minutes into this movie, I was just thinking, God, this movie is like so Spielberg.
Yeah.
I mean, he had nothing to do with it, but the movie just feels like a Spielberg movie from the very beginning. It's like it was intentionally, filmed that way.
Yeah, and I think that some of that has to do with the score. I talk about this a lot. I don't know if I've talked about it on the podcast, but I talk about it with my partner and my friends and stuff. Like, when we were growing up in the 80s, movies so often had these amazing orchestral scores. Now, to be fair, this one isn't as orchestral as the first movie was. He played more with synthesizers and electronic stuff, but there's still the very iconic Carol Ann's theme that runs throughout this one, which is really familiar. And you just don't get that much anymore. Like, I just feel like filmmakers anymore just don't worry about or think about
score so much anymore, but it made such a big difference. Like, you think about E.T. and, like you said, Steven Spielberg movies, but it wasn't just him. Lots of people were doing it, and the scores were so memorable that the moment you hear them, it strikes a chord with you. And I think that that's why some of these movies, or at least in part why some of these movies are so memorable, to me at least.
Yeah, and you hear it and you instantly know you're in for a certain caliber of film. And I don't know if it's just a chicken and egg thing, but you also feel like, okay, this is going to be a PG, family-friendly movie, which this is. And the original Poltergeist was. I mean, considering it's a horror film, it has some horror elements, but the horror element, nobody dies. It's not gory, none of that stuff. So it is a movie you can watch with your family. In fact, I think this movie and Poltergeist were both rated PG at the time, but have subsequently gotten a PG-13 moniker because at the time they were released, a PG-13 didn't exist yet. Yeah?
Well, at least the first one. I mean, this one is PG-13, but I think that you're right. The first one was PG and surely would have been PG-13 had that rating been available, but it wasn't. Yeah. But you're right. I mean, it's scary. I think both movies are scary movies, but you're right. In both, there are three of them in the original trilogy. I choose to ignore the remake. It was terrible, but in the original trilogy, there's only one violent death in all three, and that's in the third one, and even it is pretty tame. So but still, I loved these movies when I was a kid, but maybe a little bit too scary for some kids, but when it comes down to it, yeah, there's really not a whole lot of violence, if any at all, really, and no violent deaths. And like you said, it's more just like kind of a haunted house kind of thing, a spooky kind of thing. And there's imminent danger, but ultimately everybody's okay, and it's fine.
Yeah, I can't say I really enjoyed it that much watching it again as an adult, and maybe in this day and age, maybe in the 80s, it passed a little better than it does now. This is a movie I'd watch with my son, and he'd probably really like it, for sure, when he's old enough. But as an adult, I felt this movie had a lot of problems. More than anything, I felt like it was just a little too... I don't know, like the original had focus, right? The original it was basically a haunted house story. There are all these creepy things happening. It starts out with this poltergeist activity with things moving around, and it gets more and more intense in this family, and they don't know what's going on. They call in a psychic who comes and tells them that, they're in danger and that their house is a problem, and their girl disappears. She gets sucked into the other side. Right, and they enlist the help of this psychic to bring her back. And then at the end of it all, spoiler alert to anybody who hasn't seen Poltergeist, but at the end of it all, the big climax is this crazy scene just where the whole house seems to be coming apart and all this stuff is happening, and they find out that the house was built on an ancient Indian burial ground, which is why these things have been happening. And so the second movie takes that idea of the Indian burial ground just a little deeper, if I could say.
Yeah, literally.
It turns out like the Freelings are the most, the most unlucky family in the world. Not only was their house built in an ancient Indian burial ground, but underneath that happens to be a cave where a whole other set of people came and went into. Basically, the gist of it is that there was this preacher, kind of like a Mormon thing. It's shades.
Well, it was a doomsday cult.
Doomsday
is
cult.
What it was.
Yeah. Mormon era, right? Sort of doomsday cult, taking this group of people way out west, who is following this charismatic leader. We find out that his name was Kane, which is always a scary sounding name, Kane, and he basically tells this group of people that the world's going to end. They follow him into this cave. They seal themselves up. When the world doesn't end, he forces them to stay down there, and they all die. And so all of this is in a cave underneath the burial ground upon which their house was built.
Yeah.
It's a little silly, but okay.
Right, but okay, whatever. I mean, they had to introduce some new element, so that's fine. And I actually find the character of Reverend Kane to be very scary, and a lot of that has to do with his portrayal. This guy was a character actor. His name was Julian Beck, and he did work as a kind of a character actor in theater and in film, and this was like kind of a rare big role for him, and he's super creepy, and sadly part of that is because he was dying of stomach cancer at the time, and so he's got this really super gaunt look. He's got these big eyes, like, I mean, he kind of looks like a human skeleton, he's so gaunt, and he is super, super creepy. I think that part of the reason that I agree with you that I much prefer the first movie. In fact, the first movie is probably one of my top 5 favorite movies, period. I love the first Poltergeist movie. It's great. But one of the things that I feel like they couldn't recapture is that the first third or so of Poltergeist is kind of this charming, cute story about a family. And initially, when weird things start going on in their house, it's almost like it's fun,
That's true.
Like, oh my gosh, the chairs move. Like, this is so cool. Come see it. And like, look, I can sit something in this spot in the kitchen and it will slide to this spot, and I can even sit our daughter Carol Ann in the spot and she'll slide from one side of the kitchen to the other, and it's fun. Like, it's not scary at first, and it's only when things start getting dangerous then it becomes scary. Well, in this movie they've already dealt with all of that, so as soon as things start happening, they know, this isn't something to be messed with. So a little bit of that charm from the initial movie is removed. And I agree that this movie isn't as good. I still like it. In reading the trivia about it, I was interested to see that the original cut was like 2 hours and 11 minutes or something like that.
And they cut it down here to just an hour and a half. And I'm glad that they did, even though I think that there are parts of it that seem a little bit disjointed, and there are parts of it that feel a little bit rushed, especially the finale.
Oh my gosh.
I can't imagine a 2.5 hour version of this because, frankly, even though I felt like, things were consistently happening, I was a little tiny bit bored.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it has a lot of build. It starts out slowish. There's an Indian. His name is Taylor, an American Indian named Taylor, and he goes to this the top of this craggy hill. I don't know how he got up there, but anyway, he has a sort of a spiritual vision thing and gets imbued with the powers, I suppose, of a healer through a whole bunch of special effects and a flame and this kind of ritual ceremony out in the middle of nowhere. Uh-huh. That comes into play later. We see him driving down a road. He's called by Zelda Rubinstein's character, who was Tangina from the first movie, to the site of this house. This is really basically picking up where the first one left off, almost
pretty much. I think it's supposed to be a year or two later.
Oh, really? Okay.
I think so. But, yeah, he goes back to Cuesta Verde, which is where the original site was, and he goes back to the house, and that's, like you said, they go deep down in there, and he sees all of these remains of these people, like, underneath the Indian burial ground. Like, they don't just wipe that away. Like, no, it really was an Indian burial ground.
Yeah.
But also, this doomsday cult, also all died right underneath your house. And now we're going to have to deal with that.
Yeah. And I feel like all of this is just kind of a convenience thing. Like the writers are really grabbing at things to make a sequel for that is all going to tie in together. Because I'm just wondering, why did they feel the need to dig further down and do further investigation here? They find this cave and these people inside, and so he goes down, he checks it out, he senses an evil. Tangina senses an evil too, and then we jump right over to the Freelings, who are now at the grandmother's house. This is the mother of the mother. We get this, I think we already kind of know it from the beginning, from the first movie, that Carol Ann is a bit special. She can sense things more than the others, and it turns out that her grandmother also has this gift, that she has this sort of psychic ability. And so she notices this while they're together, and is talking with her mother, who is played by Geraldine Fitzgerald.
Classic Hollywood, yeah.
Yeah. And so, they're there at this house for a while, I guess a year. There's some moments where Carol Ann can sense some things. She can see colors. She's handing her yarn that she wants without looking at it. She's got the right colors or whatnot. She's drawing creepy pictures of faces that will come up later. It's pretty typical stuff. And then, in a pretty interesting moment, the grandmother says goodnight to Carol, or Carol Ann goes in and says goodnight to the grandmother, kisses her on the cheek, and walks away. When she goes into the basement, her little toy telephone rings, and when she picks it up, she says, "Oh, hi, Grandma. Oh, don't worry, everything's okay. All right, I love you too. Bye-bye." Hangs up, and then the next morning, we find out that grandmother passed away in the middle of the night, and Carol Ann was contacted from beyond the grave by her grandmother. So, we have this little element going. But, all of these scenes with the family are quite cute.
Mm-hmm. Very sweet.
The nice thing about this family is that they really do care about each other. There's none of this, tension, really nothing wrong here, which is, I don't know, that's not actually what I remembered, In this movie, I really remembered a breakdown of the father character, played by Craig T. Nelson, Stephen. because at later point he's drinking tequila and stuff. And I think as a kid, I was just associating the drinking and the alcohol with him, kind of wrestling with stuff. And I think the script is going in that direction by the middle of or to the end of the movie, but either due to the cuts that were made or just the way it's written or how fast the movie goes, I feel like it's so downplayed as to be non-existent. Like, we're told that he's having this emotional struggle, but we're not seeing a really deep emotional struggle here throughout the movie. I think it's not deep enough anyway to really resonate with me. I mean, at the end of the day, he's still very much connected to his family, very much attached, seems very much in control. He might not be making all the right decisions, but he's still a decision maker making decisions through the movie. He's not incapacitated.
Right. Well, I have, you talking about, how the family, you can tell that there's a strong bond between them throughout. That's true, but that's really kind of like the point of the movie. I mean, like, that's their strength.
Is
like
that they're together. That's true.
Right. And that they love each other and that their love can conquer all or whatever. And you do see that, and people emphasize that throughout. Like, they say that the evil's going to try to break you up. They're going to try to turn you against one another, but your strength is that you are together and that you love each other as a family. And that's where they draw their strength. Now, and that was true in the first movie, too. I will say, and I don't know if it's because of the writing or the direction, or I have no idea what it is, but I felt like Craig T. Nelson's performance in this movie was a little bit flat. I believed him more in the first movie. In this movie, he feels kind of more like, oh, I'm the goofy dad. Like
the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he gets very sinister at the end when he kind of becomes... Well, spoiler alert again, but frankly, literally possessed, really, at one point. And that's scary, but beyond that, he's painted a little goofier in this movie than he was in the first, which I don't love. It doesn't kill me, it doesn't take me out of it, but it's not great. Before the grandma dies, though, there's this great scene that I love. They're at a shopping center. The mom and the two kids. There were 3 kids in the original movie. There was an older sister named Dana, and this gets down to we could probably do a whole episode about the Poltergeist curse. But the oldest daughter from the first movie was murdered. The actress who played her was murdered by her boyfriend shortly after filming the first movie. And so she doesn't appear in this movie. And apparently in a deleted scene, they explain that she was off at college. Really, like... You could just assume that, she was old enough in the first movie, you would assume she was off at college or she had moved out or whatever. But anyway, so the mom is at a shopping center, like an outdoor shopping center with the 2 kids. This creepy guy, Carol Ann kind of gets separated from Robbie and the mom. And this creepy guy, this ghostly guy who Carol Ann sees people like walking through him, like he's clearly like an apparition. Follows her around. And again, it's this Reverend Kane, and he's dressed in like period clothing, which apparently nobody finds to be odd. And he talks to her and he sings to her.
Are you lost, sweetheart? Are you afraid, honey? Well, why don't you come with me? All right. I'll sing you a song till your mom comes back. God is in his holy temple. Earthly thoughts, be silent now.
And so we know that this is basically the new villain who is pursuing her. And as it turns out, we're meant to believe that though he didn't appear in the first movie, he was part of
the entity or the evil entity, or was at least a witness to what happened in the original movie. And he needs Carol Ann to fulfill his purpose, to lead his people out of the earthly realm into the light. And so he's after her from the beginning. Again, I really can't say enough about how creepy Julian Beck's performance is. Like,
oh, yeah.
it's nightmarish. I mean, especially if you're a kid. I mean, which is when I saw this. He's the creepy guy that your parents warned you about. Don't talk to strangers. So creepy.
Oh yeah. If you just see this guy, you wouldn't want to spend more than 5 minutes with him. He just his whole appearance, and then his performance is quite good too. He speaks very slowly and very deliberately. Whether it's just the way his face is or whether it's very deliberate too, he really makes a point of opening his mouth a lot, showing his teeth, and just being very deliberate about what he says. It sounds calculated, kind of like a cunning person. But yet he's also trying to come across as a slow, deliberate kind of preacher character, which, that's kind of a character trait of some, Southern Baptist or evangelical type preachers, is this sort of slow. So, I mean, it all really fits well. It's played quite well. I was looking up more about this actor, and I was so surprised to hear that he was a big pioneer in avant-garde theater. In the avant-garde theater world. I mean, he was born in 1925, but he got together with a group of people, and they were doing something called the Living Theater, where they did these extremely experimental and controversial type theater performances. Eventually, they had to do it in people's homes. Because they were getting arrested for stuff like indecent exposure and public nuisance, and they would do shows where they would go into the audience and do all this audience participation. Apparently also they were big anarchists, and they were big on LSD and drug use. And so he would be high on LSD. They would all be tripping on LSD when they were doing their performances and stuff like that. One time they were doing a show about drug users, and there were actors walking around amongst the audience, yelling at audience members, trying to get them to give them money for their next fix. Another one, they read off a list of social taboos, and one of them was public nudity, and they're doing this while they're taking their clothes off, which is one of the things that would get them arrested. This guy who's in his 60s or so by the time this movie comes out and is sure to die, had a really interesting career behind him. But I think that this character, the thing that I think bothered me so much about this movie, and I think you pointed to it about, I think Greg T. Nelson's acting sort of flat in this movie really contributed to it. But the other aspect of it is that it seems like the way that this Kane character is trying to get into them is by driving a wedge between the dad and the family, trying to play on his supposed inadequacies and his feelings like he can't be a man. But I don't really see that. He's being told about it. Well, there's a scene after the one you mentioned, and after the grandmother dies, where this guy walks up to the house, Kane, and it instantly starts raining, which should be your first clue, by the way. It's only raining over the house. He walks up to the door, and he's singing a hymn, and he has a dialogue with the family outside, and he's trying to get into the house. Just let me in, just let me in. And then he starts talking about how, a little bit more and more about how he knows what's going on with them. At this point, they have already met, I skipped a bit, but they already met this Taylor guy, which is big. I guess I should talk about that first, right? The Native American Indian Taylor shows up at their house and tells them that they're in grave danger, and he's been sent by
Tangina to help. Well, and this is after, we very early on in the movie, right after the grandma dies, there's a big scene where big clouds come up over the house and the phone rings again, but the toy phone. But this time it's not grandma, it's somebody scary that Carol Ann talks to, and
the whole house shakes and all this crazy stuff is happening. The toys all come to life and are walking around, and
just like before, basically.
Right. Just like before, exactly. And the parents, it all happens very quickly, and the parents bust into the kids' room and they find the kids, and Carol Ann turns and looks at them and says, "They're back," just like they're here from the first movie. You got to get the tagline back in there. So at this point, they know that this crap is happening again, and then that's when Taylor shows up. And Carol Ann likes him right away, but Stephen, the dad, is very skeptical of him.
And he shows himself as the mystical Native American. It's sort of this trope. And I think nowadays it feels a little weird.
It does, but the funny thing is, he really was.
Yeah, it's true.
Like the actor who played him, this is the same guy, Will Sampson, who played the silent patient in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Chief, I think. But in real life, this guy was a shaman, for several different tribes. And once again, I read this in the trivia. They say, because later on there are scenes where there are skeletons and corpses and cadavers and stuff, and they said that some of them were real because it was cheaper than getting the fake ones. Well, that was true in the first movie too. And they say, the actors didn't know. Well, you would think that the actors would at least be suspicious. In the first movie, Jo Beth Williams was in a pool with all these skeletons that were real. And she didn't know it at the time, but she found out later. One would think that they might at least be suspicious the second time around. But apparently not. And lots of weird stuff happened. Like they did a whole day of shooting with these real corpses, and the film all came out totally blank, like just black, and they had to go back and do hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of reshoots. And so they thought that the set was possessed. So Will Sampson, who played Taylor, came in and did an exorcism of the set. Like, quit using real bodies, you guys. I get that it's cheap.
Right, I get that it's cheaper, but man, think about the other costs.
It's just so weird. Like, what do? You walk into the Hollywood props closet and there's a door that says fake corpses and another door that says real corpses. And
yeah.
I guess I'll take 5 of those, and we're going to cut a little bit of money. I'll take 3 of those over there.
I don't know.
Okay.
But I get what you're saying. It seems, the Native American spiritual guide or shaman or whatever, like it seems like a trope. And it does, and it was. But in this case, turns out he really was that guy.
Yeah, maybe they didn't need special effects for the moment where he's raised his hands in the air and all the butterflies are floating around him and they're awed.
Right.
I think, there's nothing wrong. I mean, you should be able to do this, right? You should be able to do something like this as long as you're being respectful and you're not making fun of it or whatever. Of course, there's mysticism in Native American religions and all that. You should be able to have a shaman doing shamanistic things and wonder, just like you could have a magician doing crazy stuff or whatever.
Or a priest or whatever.
There's a billion of that, right? So no big deal, really. It just feels a little weird, and I think it feels especially weird because it's so super magical. Like with Jerry Goldsmith's score behind it, and they're looking out the window in just abject wonder with these like bright smiles on their faces. Again, it's like total Spielberg, and he's sitting there just staring up into the sky, and these butterflies are twirling around him. It's sort of like, oh, come on, It's almost like a cartoon at that point. But anyway, okay, so we've got him. He's there. Craig T. Nelson's character, the Stephen, the dad, is a little skeptical of him, but not skeptical enough, apparently, to keep him from living in their backyard. So he's in a tent in their backyard.
So long as he'll work on the car.
Yeah, exactly. That's basically it. Because the car is angry. So so this is going on. And in the meantime, as I was talking about earlier, Kane comes walking up to the house, and he has this whole dialogue with them.
There's an Indian living here with you?
Taylor.
So that's what he calls himself now. You are in danger.
What do you mean?
I'm with an organization whose concern is families like your own, families in crisis that are preyed upon by charlatans with fake magic and false solutions. Now, I don't expect you to believe me now, but let me come in and talk to you about it.
And finally, the father sends the rest of the family inside, steps behind the screen glass, the screen door, closes it so that he's got something between him and this guy. And it's just a really creepy scene, dialogue that goes between them. It's so, and I don't know if they filmed this on a different day, if they intentionally did something different with his makeup, or if it just looked different between the screen, because as their conversation goes on, Kane seems to like look more and more gaunt and menacing, just like physically. Did you get that feeling?
Well, yes. And, all these special effects and things that happen throughout, like, that's scary and exciting. But, like, I feel like this is one of the creepiest scenes. Mm-hmm. And I think that part of it is just that we as viewers, I think that Steven, the character, picks up on it eventually, but just the manipulation tactics of this guy, it's believable because you can believe that this would be a guy who would be able to manipulate a group of people into believing that it was in their best interest to go underground to endure the end of the world or whatever.
Yeah.
And, that's just kind of a spooky thing. Ministers, spiritual leaders, they have to have a certain charisma or something in order to get people to listen to them and to believe them.
Yeah, it's true.
And some people, can use that in bad ways. That's what it feels like here. Like he's saying, I'm here to help you. I want to help you. And, this other guy who you're listening to is bad. Don't listen to him. And he totally plays on Steven's insecurities about being able to protect his family, about being a good father, about being a man, questioning just, his manhood and his masculinity. And, can you protect your family? Can you lead your family? And it works. Like he's almost, and he's got this hypnotic thing going on, which you can see in the performance. And I think they do a good job here where you see that somehow Kane, he locks in eye contact with Steven. And when they're locked in, he kind of has this hypnotic power over him. And then I feel like Carol Ann says something off from, the distance from back behind Steven, and it diverts his attention away for just a second, but that's enough to break the spell.
That's right.
Oh, I can't describe it well enough. It's just such a creepy, eerie scene. And this guy is spooky looking to look at anyway. And then to see this kind of magnetism and power that he has to manipulate, it's really spooky. It's really good.
It is good. It's a little like The Vampire, right? In that kind of hypnosis, and also this insistence that he's got to get in the house. Like, I don't know about you, but what was going through my mind here was, oh, I see. Like, he has to be invited in, in order to do it, and this is his tag. This is what he's doing, and so that's part of the tension here too. Is like, oh my God, don't let him in, or it's all over for you guys.
Right.
But that again, that's a bit of a letdown actually, because it turns out that's not the case at all.
Right.
In the context of the rest of the movie, after such a powerful scene, I felt like that scene didn't really amount to much for two reasons. One was that it felt like it was setting up this notion that they had some barrier of, that if as long as he wasn't being brought into their home, they could somehow keep him at bay. It turns out it doesn't even matter. Like, he can reach them anywhere they are. And he even shows up as an apparition in their living room a little bit later, like as if it's nothing. So there's that part that I was like, oh, that's a shame. But the second part is, this is the only place I could find in the film where we really is alluded to any sort of self-doubt or this notion that Stephen is unable to provide for his family or has this self-consciousness about him. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but anything up to this point, I really didn't see that. And even after this, so they're trying to play with it, but it doesn't really come through. And so it seems like just telling us instead of showing us, a kind of lazy writing where he says, I'm peering into your mind and this is what I see. And Stephen's saying, oh my God, you're absolutely right. And now we're supposed to get that information. But it seems at odds with the rest of how the movie goes.
I don't like to be contrary, but I will disagree with you a little. That's a lie. I love to be contrary. But I'll say I think that they did a better job than you're giving them credit for.
Really?
By showing beyond this point. Now, maybe not up to this point.
Okay.
Except for, like I can see how that would be something easy to play on where, his business has failed. He's now, he was a successful real estate developer. Now he's selling crappy vacuum cleaners door to door.
Right.
They have to live with his mother-in-law because he hasn't or can't provide them a home. But so there's that leading up to it, and then after this, there's at least suggestion of his retreat into alcohol. You know, he's drinking pretty consistently from this point on. I don't know. I got the suggestion that this was kind of a defeated man,
But, I mean, I see the suggestion, what you're talking about, but up until this point, even though, there are these things, he's still pretty confident about it. He has that whole conversation with his wife where his wife is at more than him kind of saying, look, we're in a bad spot right now. We're living with my mom, and why are you selling vacuum cleaners? We need, some stability or whatever. And he kind of starts to go into this goofy sort of play acting thing like, oh, you're right, everything's going downhill. And she starts laughing at him, and they embrace and they kiss and they love each other, and the kids come in and they all love each other. And it's all like, you know what I mean? It's like, it's not like, I feel like he buys into that. Maybe he's not making the right choices. Maybe he's unsure of the choices he's made. I don't know. I just don't get the sense that he's lost that self-confidence up until this point. And then later, as the film goes on, there's the alcoholism part, right? He's hitting the bottle a few times. But I don't know, aside from like 2 scenes, and maybe it's just because the movie's pretty rushed from this point on anyway, aside from 2 scenes of him drinking, I mean, that's it. I mean, to me, that's kind of lazy. We don't see him stumbling around. We don't get the sense that it's inhibiting his ability to connect with people, or that at the end of the day, he's not functioning, or he's I don't know. It's just, I didn't get any of that. Maybe it's in deleted scenes, or...
Well, that's what I was going to say. An hour was cut, who knows what we lost there, but even in the stuff that you're saying, when they're talking about how the insurance isn't going to cover their lost home because since it just disappeared, it's only technically missing. Like, that's so stupid. But it's I know, but it sounds like something that an insurance company would do, right? Whatever. And they do. They have that discussion where they're talking about how they're on hard times or whatever, and he turns to humor. But I see that as a defense mechanism. What else are we going to do but joke about it? His retreat into alcohol, I think, even though we don't see that much of it, and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with having a few drinks to drown your sorrows. That's fine. But I think that the suggestion is that he's maybe diving in a little too deep.
Well, I tell you what, if nursing 1 bottle of tequila over the course of a couple
through the whole
weeks,
movie
is diving in deep, I'd say he's in the shallow end right now for sure.
That's true. Oh man. Okay, well, Diane, the mom, then has a vision. I don't remember if it's inspired by anything. I think maybe Tangina. Yeah, Tangina gives her some pictures, some photographs of the cult, and she recognizes Kane, and she sees the underground bunker that we've already seen the corpses in, and so we know that she is kind of special too, which Tangina says. She says, Carol Ann is special, your mom was special, and I bet anything that you are too. She says that Carol Ann's highly clairvoyant, and Kane thinks that he needs her to lead them into the light. And then crazy stuff starts happening. Robbie, the son, who... I don't know if this was a reshoot or not, but did you notice that in this braces scene that he looked like at least 2 years older than he looks in the rest of the movie?
No, I didn't notice that. For me, I had it in my head that the braces scene happened to the girl in the first movie. So I was totally off on this.
Gotcha.
Movie.
Well, his braces attack him, and that sounds really stupid. There's actually some really cool effects. The wires of the braces shoot out, and they, it's a ridiculous amount of wire. It like ties him to the ceiling of the bedroom, and the parents come in are trying to help, and they're yelling for Taylor to come help, but he doesn't because he's protecting Carol Ann. And when they finally get Robbie out, Steven is mad. Why didn't you help us? And he says, because they don't want you. They're just trying to distract you away from her. They want Carol Ann.
I don't know, man. There's going to be a lot more stuff happening, and this is kind of how I felt about the movie. Like, why don't they just go after Carol Ann then? Like, why was it in her bathroom? Why didn't she just get sucked down the drain or something?
Yeah.
If they can do any of and all this stuff we're about to describe is just goes all over the place. It's like his braces attacking him and stuff, and not like that was that restrained in the first movie, but it just felt a little more grounded. And in this sense, because it's been hammered into our heads that they're trying to get Carol Ann, I'm trying to think, what is his method? It didn't ring true to this character who apparently has all of this control, can make all these spooky things happen, why he's having such a hard time pulling her away when he can do anything he wants to the rest of the family.
I feel like I'm defending it too much, but until Robbie goes away to the bathroom to brush his teeth or whatever, they're always all together. Like, they're slumber partying, not literally. They're just all sleeping together in the living room. So they're all always together. I feel like by attacking Robbie when he goes off on his own, that's to try to get them away from her. And it works. It does get the parents away from her, but that's why Taylor stays. Because they're trying to get her alone so that they can, and it all comes down to, it sounds so cliched, but it doesn't even bother me because, I like that idea of a family's bond and a family's strength protecting them. Yeah, it sounds like a cliche, and it very well may be, but it doesn't bother me. And so to have that idea of the only way to get to her is to get the rest of them away from her, that makes sense to me.
All right. I'll grant you that. I didn't really see it that way before, but now that we're talking about it, it actually makes perfect sense.
Well, so anyway, I don't know. We get lots of exposition, about the doomsday culture or whatever, and then Taylor takes Steven up to this impossible rock tower.
Maybe they cut out the scene in between there where they were like scaling it, with like they had their climbing gear.
I know. It's funny. Like, I feel like 2 weeks in a row we've watched movies where they've had to climb impossible mountains.
Oh, that's
to get,
right.
Like...
Hey, at least in the last one they actually climbed it.
You're right. Instead of just appearing at the top. And like Steven with his like dad gut is just like sitting up there like yucking it up. Like, what are we doing up here?
I loved his line actually because they're in like a sweat box. We've heard about this because there have been some accidents in regards to these sorts of things, but it's apparently a very traditional Native American thing to put yourself in a hut or something and then get all sweaty and then.
I love the health club. I'm just wondering when I get the key to my locker.
Yeah.
and actually, the reaction is really cool. He just smiles at him and he says, sense of humor. That you're going to need that. It's not like he says, pay attention, you dick. It's it's cool.
No,
actually, yeah.
Taylor plays it very cool with Steve throughout the whole movie, and I like that. Like, he gets him. Like, he gets, this is the kind of guy you are. I get it. Like, I can work with that. He's totally cool with them the whole time. But anyway, he blows some magic smoke in Steven's face, and that's important later.
He gets sucked in to blow out later, yes.
Right, exactly. But then, okay, so he tells them, you have to take your family back to Cuesta Verde, the original site, their old house or whatever. And he doesn't really explain why, but okay. And then all of a sudden Taylor is gone, which I don't understand. Was there some sort of explanation for why he wasn't with them anymore?
He just off the cuff said, I've done all I can for you. You're on your own, basically, which is kind of another funny thing about this movie. I mean, I know you've got to do things to advance the plot and for our audience's purposes, but, you know, as soon as they find this pit underneath the Indian burial ground in their house, don't you think that Tangina could have at least, like, called them up first? Like, let them know, hey, I'm sending a guy your way. I'm also going to be there shortly. They just leave them out in limbo for a while, send this mysterious Indian. Oh, by the way, Tangina sends me. He's there for like a week or two, and then Zelda shows up again. Like, how far away do they live? And then this time, he just up and leaves, like you said. And now you've got to fight it alone. But then when they get to Cuesta Verde, Tangina is right there. Like, she's been camped out by that hole, like, for the last 2 weeks.
So they end up by themselves, which leads to this, what I think is probably the most memorable scene of this movie, when the family is just all home together, and, like, Diane is taking a bath with Tangina, which, by the way, I don't remember if
she's not taking a bath with Tangina. I'll tell you that.
No, you're not. You're right. That would have been an interesting twist. She's taking a bath with Carol Ann. I was thinking ahead of myself. I was trying to think it was coming next. But yeah, they're taking a bath, and I was trying to come up with the critics' names. I think it was Roger Ebert who hated this movie.
Gene Siskel hated it.
Okay. All right. Hated it. And one of the reasons that he hated it was because he thought that Jo Beth Williams was trampy because she had appeared nude in movies before. Well, I guess technically she appears nude in this movie too, because she's taking a bath with her daughter and you only see her from the back.
I can't think of anything trampier than taking a bath with your daughter.
Right. Like you maybe see a tiny little bit of side boob. Like, it's so tame. But anyway, regardless, Steven is drinking. He's finishing off this bottle of tequila that he's been nursing the whole time. And he drinks the worm, which they call it tequila so many times. I have never seen a tequila with a worm in it. Now, mezcal has a worm in it. And I've drank that, and that stuff will f you up. That stuff will put a demon in you.
You've had some exorcisms yourself.
Yeah, I've been to Mexico. But so he drinks the worm, which you do. I didn't have to be the one to do it, thank God. But he drinks the worm. And like, it's a possessed worm. Like, you can like, it starts moving around before he even drinks it. And then he drinks it. And then he's possessed by Kane. And if his acting has been flat through the rest of the movie, I thought Craig T. Nelson did a really good job here of channeling Julian Beck's character.
Oh, he did. Yeah.
He gets very wide-eyed, and he made a point of pulling his lips back over his teeth to really expose his teeth. And he talks like him, and he's very sweaty, and it's a really uncomfortable scene because he first has a creepy, thank God, brief scene with Carol Ann. That could have gotten very dark, but luckily it was very brief. But then he's with Diane, and, you know, these two actors had really strong chemistry together.
Yes.
Like, I really believed them as a husband and wife 100% from the first movie to the second movie. And to now see Steven being so creepy with her, and it starts off just really super handsy, but then it gets violent and rapey, and it's really intense and very uncomfortable and really scary. And I thought that they both did a really good job with it.
This begs that question earlier, though. Why did he have such a brief little scene with Carol Ann? He possessed Carol Ann's dad. Carol Ann's right there. Can he just grab her and go? Why does he have to let her run off and then have this whole deal with her mother? I don't know, did you just pop a huge boner or something? Like, well, wait a minute.
I guess, but, you know, somebody had said, either Taylor or Tangina had said, his goal is going to be to drive you apart. He has to drive you apart. And then not only is he being creepy and rapey with the wife, but he's intentionally very loudly saying, you never wanted Carol Ann. You don't love Carol Ann. You never wanted her.
Yeah, you wish she hadn't been born.
Right. And the wife is trying to shush him and she's crying. And, I don't know if there's supposed to be some more to the backstory there or whatever, but it's effective because we see that Carol Ann hears it and that it upsets her. And if their family bond is really what is protecting them and keeping them together, then he has done something by driving this wedge or planting this seed of doubt between them.
True.
And then, as he's like trying to rape her, Diane says to Stephen, I love you. Don't you know that? I love you. And it's like Stephen gets control of his body back, like he's fighting it, and he fights it. And then he starts to retch and he vomits up what first looks like kind of a big scary worm, but what turns into a freaking demon that he expels out of his mouth. And it just looks awful. And I read that the filming of it was awful because it took so long to do and they had to do so many reshoots, and poor Craig T. Nelson just was in agony, I guess. But it looks amazing. And then he vomits up this creature that goes scurrying along. And it's this creature that looks so freaking cool. And he's kind of got Kane's face, like with the teeth and the eyes, but very, otherworldly reptilian. He was played by this stuntman who was a Vietnam vet who had been a triple amputee. It just looks...
It's hideous.
I think if anybody remembers anything from this movie, this is the part that they will remember because it's just so unsettling. It's really cool.
It's the PG-13 part of the movie, honestly.
Yeah.
It really is. Yeah. It's gross, and it scurries away. And I guess H.R. Giger, who designed Alien and all that, did designs for this movie as well. The design for that creature that... I don't know if it was that particular version of the creature or if it's the creature that then turns into in their stairwell, which is where they'd have a bit of a battle with it.
Yeah, the beast is what it's referred to. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he wasn't happy with the way all that turned out. He said that it just showed him that he has to be on set for any of these movies that he advises, or else it won't be done to his satisfaction. So,
and I understand that. And I respect him so much as an artist. I've seen so much of his artwork, his sketches and stuff. And he, I can't imagine what kind of dark mind his stuff comes from.
It didn't look enough like a giant dick is probably what it
maybe. But his artwork really is amazing. I thought the creature looked good. But then, just like in the first movie, and I'm not complaining about this because I love the first movie, the house goes crazy. They're fighting their way through all kinds of weird things going on in the house. They end up in the garage because Carol Ann has hidden in the car, and they finally get in the car. There's a scene where a chainsaw attacks the car. They considered shooting the movie in 3D. And so this is one of the scenes that was supposed to pay service to that. It actually looks kind of goofy in the movie, but
it sure does. It's kind of labored too.
But they get out and they have to go back to Cuesta Verde, and they do, and they go down in, under where their old house was, back to the burial spot.
Well, and Tangine is there waiting for them.
Yes.
And this is what I was saying earlier, like all this stuff's going on and she's just hanging out by the hole waiting for them to come back. Like she knows they're going to be there.
Right. I knew you'd come. Like, it's about time. Geez, did the house just attack you? Come on. So they go down there, and then you can tell that they, in editing or wherever, that this was very rushed. Because they just get down there, and then from out of nowhere, there's like a big flash of light, and you hear Kane's voice, and Diane and Carol Ann get sucked into the void. And this is my biggest complaint with this movie, is that the finale of this movie is just too reminiscent of the finale of the first movie. It's really the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. You know, that Carol Ann is off floating in space. In the first movie, Carol Ann is off floating in space and they have to send Diane in to get her. And in this movie, Carol Ann and Diane are both floating off into space. So, and Taylor's there too. He's tending a spiritual fire down underground, apparently.
They just turn around the corner and there he is.
Right. And he's like, this is the entrance, jump in. And so they do. So Robbie and Steven just jump into the fire. And then they're all just floating in space. And it's all very ethereal. Like, you know, it's 80s special effects. So it doesn't look particularly real, but it's pretty to look at least. And they're all just floating in space. And they get together. But then the big beast appears again, and somehow Taylor has this spear that we saw in like the first 30 seconds of the movie and then never again. And he throws it into the fire, and Steven gets it, and he throws it, and it kills the beast. Like the beast explodes, but the explosion causes Carol Ann to go flipping off into nothingness, and they can't see her. And Taylor's like, oh no, it's over. She's lost. But then, thankfully, the angelic grandmother comes out of the light with Carol Ann and reunites them all, and they all come back out of the fire, and they're back, and everything's okay.
The end.
And then there's some cute little comedy where Steven gives Taylor the car, and then they realize they don't have a way to get home, so they all go chasing him down the street, and that's the end. The ending, you know, as quickly as I just paraphrased it,
it's basically as quick as it is.
It's like it goes so fast.
Yeah,
and it's a little bit of a letdown. It's a little bit anticlimactic, which is unfortunate.
It's unfortunate, and it's a little cheesy too. I mean, the whole thing's a little hokey. I mean, I guess this universe is kind of like that. Like you said, it's very much like the first one, but this magical spear gets thrust into the spiritual realm, and then they just shows up where they are, and they toss it at the demon, and then it's dead. And then, I mean, you know, I think it's a big letdown, honestly. It just goes by so quickly, and it's too special effectsy for me. I don't know.
Yeah.
I felt like a lot of the movie was. And, it loses some of that magic. It doesn't ground it so much in reality, as much as a movie about Poltergeist and the other side or whatever can be grounded in reality. You need hooks in there a little bit. And I felt like there was just so much going on throughout the movie that, you know, the braces thing attacking the kid, the ghost appearing everywhere, this demon thing coming out of him spitting out the demon worm and all that. That's what I meant when I said earlier, like it just kind of lacked a little bit of focus. I think what I really meant was it just lacked a grounding in a sense of like some rules that I could understand and play by. You know, I think a lot of people, their complaint about fantasy in general is that, well, anything can happen, so how do I get invested in it when I know somebody's going to swoop in with a magic spell or a magic creature and you know, Deus Ex Machina something away. And I felt like this movie did that a lot. It was a spectacle to watch. It was well acted. You know, I liked the family, and I think I have gained a bit more appreciation for it, talking about it with you. Now that you had kind of explained to me that it's their whole family staying together that maybe is what kind of kept them alive through all this. And it makes a little more sense that way. I get it.
It's not a great movie. I don't know. I don't know if it's because of my love of the first movie. Like, seriously, I can't go on. I can't believe 100 and who knows how many episodes we are in now.
Plus,
and we haven't.
Yeah.
Oh, geez. And we haven't done Poltergeist. Seriously, it's one of my favorite movies. It's not as good, but it's not a terrible sequel. Have you seen Part 3?
Oh, a long time ago when it first came out, I saw it once. That was it.
Part 3 is not even a good movie, but I love it.
Doesn't it take place in a skyscraper or something?
Yes, it takes place in the Hancock Building in Chicago, and it's not a good movie, but I absolutely love it. I think part of it is Heather O'Rourke, Carol Ann. she's just so sweet and cute and innocent. And oh God, I just love her so much. And then, part 3, the tragedy, again with the curse, the tragedy of part 3 is that there are different stories. Some people say that they had finished production and then she died right after. And then they went back into film reshoots. There are other people that say that they hadn't finished and she died. But she died. This sweet, poor, cute little girl died because she was misdiagnosed with some sort of stomach ailment. And it's just so sad. And she's just so sweet and cute in these movies. And I just love her. And really, Craig T. Nelson, he's still a very active working actor. And Jo Beth Williams has done tons of stuff too. But there's something natural about this family. Like, I just believe them as a family and I'm rooting for them. And I liked following their story. And I can't say that I didn't like this movie. I liked it. It has its problems. I still like it, especially as far as sequels go, because sequels are such a mixed bag. I think this was a serviceable, if not better than that, sequel.
Well, when you talk about that, and we talked about this for the last couple sequels we've done as well, this movie does at least satisfy you in that almost all the main characters are back.
Right.
And, it's picking up kind of where the last movie left off, and it's tying in pretty strongly to the plot of the first film, even though it goes off kind of in its own way. Maybe even a little too much. Like you said, the ending is almost exactly the same. But at least they've maybe done a better job of striking that balance of giving the fans enough of what they liked about the original while still trying to be original in and of itself. So,
Yep.
Well, thank you again for listening to another episode. If you enjoyed this one, please share it with a friend. Our month of sequels is wrapping up to a close. We have one more sequel for you coming up next week, Return of the Living Dead Part 2. So look forward to that one. Neither of us have seen it before. We'll let you know our take on that. You let us know your take on this and any other episode that we've done by going to our website at twoguys.red40net.com. You can find us on Facebook. Just search Two Guys and a Chainsaw. Leave us a comment there on either of those places. Let us know what you thought of this film. Give us some requests for things that you want to see in the future, because we are going to do some more requests coming up here really soon. Until next time, I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
With Two Guys and a Chainsaw.